be able to do that. Okay, so Ben and I are dealing with what we call the difficult sayings of Jesus. Last week was divorce or murder. No, it wasn't. It was divorce or remarriage and or remarriage. And you know, that was a one for me. It was pretty difficult. But this week is a little different. We're looking at faithful in the little things. Before I start, just tell you this quick story just to kind of get it going. There was stories told of a prosperous young investment lawyer or a banker who was driving a brand new Beamer, BMW. He was on a mountain road. It was a snowstorm. He was going around the corners, and you know how it is in the mountains. He's up next to a cliff. The car, he loses control. He's able to unbuckle, open the door, jump out, and the car goes over the edge. Well, he's in shock, of course. Somebody comes up and says, and he's saying, "Oh, my Beamer. And the guy looks at him and he says, "I think you have things more important to worry about, like this arm. It's gone. We need to find out where it's at." And he looks down and he goes, "Oh, my Rolex. Pretty bad, I know. Really bad. You know, though, sometimes I think that's our attitude towards things, towards stuff. And you can get an idea of where we're going in this, faithful in the little things. How many of you have a lot? Go ahead, you can raise your hands. A lot. You do. You have a lot. He has this successful empire business where he harvests and sells stuff. I mean, he's flush. So if you need a loan, by the way, just go talk to him. This is what we do in men's group all the time, by the way, so he knows it's coming. Yeah, no, it's not. But I think sometimes we don't realize how much we really do have. And what Jesus calls us to, especially in our culture, is kind of tough. You realize that Jesus talks about money, material things, those more than any other topic in the Bible. Jesus does. Why? Well, because it's closest to our heart. Right? Okay, you get the point. I'm just being funny, but there is some truth to that. So we're going to look at that this morning, and we're going to look at two passages. If you go to the Bible, you'll see all the notes on the Bible app. They're all there, but I think I included a lot of them here this morning. I can't remember all that. We're going to be looking at Luke chapter 16. And then we're going to be contrasting that a little bit with Luke chapter 12. But first, let's go with 16, okay? Luke chapter 16, starting in verse 1. Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day, a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you are going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how I'll ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "Well, I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager said, "Take the bill, quickly change it to 400 gallons. "And how much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal. This is the NLT, by the way, just so you know, so it's a little bit different. To admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light." And so Jesus goes on, verse 9. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Verse 10. If you're faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with the things of your own? No one can serve two masters, for he will hate one and love the other. For you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. The Pharisees, who dearly loved their money, heard all of this and scoffed at him. Then he said to them, you like to appear righteous in public, but God knows your hearts. What this world honors is detestable in the sight of God. Now, that dishonest rascal, dishonest manager, he's pretty shrewd, wasn't he? He figured out what he was going to do to take care of himself. He's pretty calculating. I mean, he was obviously a very smart person. He knew how to work the system, work it with the manager. Who knows? We don't know what happened. Maybe he made the manager the owner a lot of money. And it just, you know how it is. I talked with someone not long ago where they had a bookkeeper who was with them for like 30 years, and then all of a sudden they stole $1.5 million. So who knows what the temptations were going on in that person, in this manager? I don't know. We do know a few things. One, he was going to have to give an account. And when the owner called him in, he knew it was up. The gig was up. He was going to have to settle. He knew he was in trouble. He was going to lose his job. He didn't want to work and do real work. He wanted to be able to just skim off the top. He didn't want to be a beggar. He was used to that standard of living, and he was pretty happy with that. He was content with that. But he also was smart enough to realize he had a limited opportunity. He had to act, and he had to do it now. So he called in all the creditors that owed the owner money, and he figured out how to do it. You know what's really amazing about this passage of Scripture? Is that Jesus praises the shrewd, dishonest manager. Did you catch that when we read that? He praised him. Now that doesn't seem quite right, does it? I mean, that's one of those hard sayings that Jesus does, and it's like it turns our world upside down. Why would you praise the dishonest manager? And then he goes on to even praise him and praise the world that they're more shrewd in dealing with their own than we are as believers in dealing with our own. And by the way, the word shrewd means wise or smart. So you get that? He says he was smart. He was wise. Well, before I get to explaining all of that, let me just point out a couple things. The truth of the matter is, in this parable, we're also in trouble. We're going to have to give an account for what we do. How many of you live up to the 10 Commandments every day? Don't answer. I know. We all know, right? None of us do that. None of us. How about the great command that Jesus had? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and spirit, and your neighbor as yourself, until that guy cuts you off in traffic. Right? None of us do. We all have to give an account. Hebrews talks about that, where it says, just as our people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment. And in Romans 12, it says or Romans 14, it says something similar, that we're going to have to give an account for our life. So we've got those things. Secondly, we're in trouble. We are in trouble. We can't uphold those 10 commandments. We can't uphold that. So what do? Well, I think we need to respond the way the dishonest manager did. We have to be wise and shrewd in what we're doing. And so you know what we do? We use the master's resources. We'll get to that in just a second. How many of you are in debt to God? Actually, all of you should. Let me put it this way. Do you know anybody who's not in debt to God? No. We all are, aren't we? The breath that we breathe, this mind, the food that we eat, the clothes that we put on, where's that come from? Oh, we're so smart, we can just figure it out ourselves. Well, who's the one who figured it out for us? All of us are in debt to God. See, the thing is, we're supposed to act and use the master's resources. Now, that just seems doesn't it seem weird? When I say it like that, doesn't that seem weird? It feels like we're stealing, doesn't it? Doesn't it? It does. It feels like we're stealing. How can that be right? And yet God wants us to use those resources And that's why he praised the dishonest manager. Okay, let's go back and read that again, because I can see some of you are going, what? You're saying, what is going on here? Verse 9, here's the lesson out of 16. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Okay, now whose resources are they? If we're His, they're really His, aren't they? If we belong to God, they are really His resources. We're permitted, in fact commanded, to use God's resources for His benefit. And those resources happen to be in your back pocket. In Mark chapter 8, it says this, 35 and 36. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his soul? If God has given us everything, including our life, we belong to Him. Everything that we have belongs to Him. Nothing that we can claim that is just ours. It's all His. And He's saying, use the resources for His benefit. Okay, let's switch gears. I told you we're going to contrast this. Let's look at Luke chapter 12. There's a rich farmer who had a fertile field that produced fine crops. And he said, what shall I do? I don't have room for all my crops. Verse 18, then he said, I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and say to myself, my friend, you've stored away enough good for years to come. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. And God said to him, you fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything that you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. So that word fool, by the way, in the Greek, and I think Ben talked about this a couple weeks ago, it's someone without a mind or without reason. There's nothing between these two ears. That's really what he's saying. On the other hand, the word shrewd that we talked about, the shrewd, dishonest manager, means to be smart or to be wise. And so what Jesus is saying, he's contrasting these two guys, and he's saying, there's nothing wrong, by the way, with building barns. But if you just say, eat, drink, and be merry, I've got enough, I'm done, I don't have to worry about anything else, you're being a fool. Instead, as we use the resources that God has given us to help other people, we're being wise in what we're doing. So the master praises the dishonest manager for being smart. And here's how it says it in the New Contemporary Version. Yes, worldly people are smarter than their own kind than spiritual people are. I tell you, make friends for yourselves using worldly riches so that when those riches are gone, you'll be welcomed in those homes that continue forever. You know, we often have a pretty, I want to say, a difficult relationship with money and material things, don't we? I mean, I tell everybody that we invest, my father-in-law invested in metals, and we have junk all over the place. Yard art, 2 cranes, 3 Pettibone rubber-tired skidders, 5 tractors, 8 bulldozers, all this metal, okay? Of course, do you think I'm greedy over that? Actually, it almost pays somebody to get rid of it because it's so much stuff. But we have a difficult relationship with those types of things, with material things in our lives. And you know what? Well, oftentimes we'll gather stuff and gather and gather. Where's Rhonda at? Your husband did that. I'm not picking at him, but he would buy things, and then he had a project for the future, and he would use it at that point. But he didn't, and unfortunately, he passed away about 3 years ago. The thing is that that's going to happen to every one of us, where we've got stuff, but what's our relationship to it? Howard Hendricks was a Bible preacher a long time ago, and he was a guest of a man back in Boston who happened to have a lot of money. And Hendricks was very impressed by this guy's lack of pride and lack of being proud of what he had. And they had millions. And he finally said, he asked him, he says, how in the world did you grow up in the midst of all this opulence, these riches, and not be proud of all of that and be consumed by materialism? You know what the guy said? He says, when I was being raised here in this place, my mom and dad said two things. It's either, got to make sure I get it right, it's either an idol or it's a tool. You see the difference? It's either an idol or a tool. And he says, it's stuff. It's just stuff. And that's basically what Jesus is trying to tell us today, too. What you have is either an idol or it's a tool. And if it's a tool, we use it for the kingdom. In 1 Timothy 6 and 7, verse 17, I want to read this. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud, not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. You catch that? I want you to focus on that for a moment. Don't forget, okay? Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up treasure as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience true life. You catch that? Now, sometimes people think that we shouldn't spend money or that we should hoard it or whatever. And he's saying God gave us those riches for our enjoyment. So if you're honoring God with your money, with your resources, if you're helping advance His kingdom, if you're giving to His church, you're helping those less fortunate around you, don't feel guilty if you go on vacation. Don't feel guilty if you have to get a new car. Don't feel guilty if you actually celebrate or go to a restaurant. It says He gave us all those things for our enjoyment, but in perspective, to make sure that we're not using them just for ourselves. That was the problem with the rich fool in Luke chapter 12. I have it all. I don't need any more. Eat, drink, and be merry, and forget the rest of the world. And Jesus is saying, no, do not do that. So let me point out just several lessons real quick on this. Material stuff, you know what? By the way, who likes to play Monopoly? Anybody? Well, I haven't played it much. What's the goal of Monopoly? Get all the money, right? What was that? Somebody said? That's right. All the houses, all the main properties, Park Place, right? What's the other one? Boardwalk, thank you. I forgot those two. You want those two, and then you just pour all your money into that so that you can build houses, then hotels. What happens when you get to the end of the game? It all goes back in the box. That's my point. Every single one of us, when we pass away, it all goes back in the box. Every single person. You know, you can look in the obituaries. And by the way, did you notice the obituary this week? What was his name? Skylar? Forgot the last. Huh? Barney. Skylar Barney. Did you happen to see him? A young man, I don't know what he died of. He was here several times. And he passed away. He's probably in his early 20s. When we're done with this game we call life, it all goes back in the box, folks. Somebody else gets to play the game. Don't forget that. That is a truth that none of us want to hear, none of us like, and yet it is the truth. Eventually, every single game is going to end up. The farmer thought his problem was he had too much stuff and not enough closet space, right? Just stuff it in and we do all that. Well, I finally have enough. The barn is full. I'm financially secure. Then what? And you know, he never asked that question, then what? Are you asking that question? It's one reason that we're doing the financial planning, by the way, and we're going to do that in mid-January, and I have the date and I forgot it. Forgive me, I'll get it to you. Because we need to think ahead. We need to be smart in what we're doing. We need to use our brains, be wise in planning. Our lives does not consist of just our wealth. In James chapter 4, it says, don't you know, God asks, how quickly life passes? I bet I hear an amen in that one, don't I? What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. I'm just shocked myself how fast time flies. I mean, it's already almost October. It's going to be my 63rd year already, and I never thought I'd live to be 40. You know what? Only what we send ahead is going to last. Luke 16:9. I tell you, make use of worldly resources to benefit others, make friends. In this way, your generosity stores up a reward for you in heaven. You know, God, I think sometimes we look at what we have and we even read the Bible and it's like, why did Jesus focus so much on all this, on monies? Well, we misunderstand. He wants us to be rich. He wants us to have a huge bank account, only not here. It's up there. He's all about us being rich, but just not here. Use it for the kingdom. Use it for what God has. Store up your wealth. Matthew 6:19 and 20 says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Not treasures here, treasures there. We got a bank account. It's got your name on it. What we're going to use it for up there, I don't know. Maybe it's to build the house. I like to think of that idea from John 14, that he's preparing a place and we're throwing up money or treasures or whatever so he can buy the building materials. He doesn't need to buy them, right? Anyway, to build us a big mansion. But we've got to deposit right now. And now is the time to do that. You know, how often? Well, especially about this financial planning, and this isn't the focus of that, but oftentimes we'll hear about that and we'll say, well, when I get around to it, when things settle down just a little bit. How many times have you said that? Where are you? Boy. There's a lady in the congregation. Arlene, where are you at? There she is. Her brother-in-law just passed away. They've been looking for the last 2 weeks for a will, right? Have you found it? Nope. I'll get around to it. That's what he said. Many times she told me that. I'll get around to it. I'll get around to it. I'll write it out. When are we going to get around to it? When do you think you'll get around to it? I'll tell you when you'll get around to it, when you're 6 feet down in the ground. Because only then is it going to be quiet enough for you to be able to get around to it. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that's the case. We need to do it now. Be ready now. The fool wasn't ready. The fool was not even thinking that way. So how do we do that? Why do we do that? How do I deposit? I want to make deposits. How do I do that? You know how we do it? We focus on the things that are really important. You know what those are? Loving God, loving people. It's very simple. Loving God, loving people. We give resources, and by the way, don't think this is just about money, because it's not. Faithful in a little, that means being honest in the little things. That means being considerate to others. That means helping out when you see somebody's in need. And I want to say thank you by the way, to all of you who do help in so many ways in this church body. Those who have needs when they're moving. I can't believe how many people just step up and say, somebody else who needs their home cleaned because they're struggling with that. People step up and just do it. Needs within the church body. And we hear about them all the time. Most of the time, the left hand doesn't even know what the right hand's doing because somebody comes along and takes care of it before we even get to respond to it. So thank you for doing that. That's what we're called to do. That's when we make our deposits, folks. Every time you tithe, every time you give towards missions, every time you help out with the little kids, you're working in the preschool or the Sunday school, you're serving in whatever, your neighbors. Anytime you're sharing Jesus, giving people hope, we're making a deposit. Okay, you think, what? We are. Let me just say that God's economy is not our economy. He doesn't think in terms of what we get. He thinks in terms of what we give. That's his economy. So he gives, and you see that. He gives us, but he's saying, you have a choice. Give. In Luke chapter 21, Jesus had a great example of this. While Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people putting their gifts into the collection box. Then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 pennies. I assure you, he said, this poor widow has given more than all the rest of them. For they have given a tiny part of their surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. See, what Jesus is really saying there is, I want to see the heart. You know, it doesn't matter if it's 2 cents. We already know that from Jesus' other parables of the loaves and the fish, right? What's he do? That's one reason I love potlucks here, by the way. Because every time somebody comes in with something, there's always enough. Have you ever noticed that? By the time I get there, it's usually gone. But almost gone. Not true, I'm just teasing. But God multiplies. He provides. It's his kingdom. It's not ours. It's not our way of thinking. It's his way. It's his economy. And so he even has a passage in Luke 12 after the rich man. Listen to what he says. Do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Don't worry about that. For the pagan world runs after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Verse 32, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the poor, provide purses for ourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. How many of you have Home Depot stock? Anybody? You do. Do you actually watch it? See what it's doing? Their heart's not in it then. Because if their hearts were, if you had several thousand shares, your hearts would be in that, and every day, as a matter of fact, I have a friend who does this. Every day, several times a day, he's watching the stock market, seeing what the ticker does to know where his wealth is. Wherever our treasure is, that's where our heart is. I can look at, and I've used this illustration before. It used to be when you had your checkbook. I could look at your checkbook and tell you where your heart was. Now it's your debit card. I can look at your debit card receipts and tell where your heart is based on what you spend. There's a really good book called The Generosity Factor. Has anybody ever read that? Written by a couple guys back east, and it's a modern-day parable. And the one guy, he's a broker, and the other is an executive. And the broker is extremely rich, lives in New York City, works off of Wall Street. He has money. He's very full, has everything. But one day when he walks through the door, he asks himself the question, why do I feel so insignificant in this world? He has everything. Trophy wife, great kids, great schools, lots of cars, huge apartment, mansion, or whatever it is. Not long, and have any of you ever wondered about that? I have. Where I think, what am I doing in this world? Why am I here? For what purpose do I have? Why do I feel insignificant? And you know what usually the root cause of that is? When it's all about me. Then I go to that place. When it's all about me. Well, this broker read an article of a guy in Denver, a wealthy businessman who claimed that the greatest joy in his life was giving to others. The broker, of course, was very skeptical, did not believe it. However, he signed up and went out to Denver to just talk with this guy and see what he said. When he got there, the guy was a little bit older, and the guy said, the rich man, the executive, said, I get more joy by giving than I do by getting. As a matter of fact, I don't work to get, I work to give. He says, I hire this whole group of people every summer and all year long, actually as interns, and I watch them, and I help them grow and do things, and then I pay for their college. He has over 12 homes around the nation where kids who are troubled are free to come and find sanctuary, and where he trains them and develops them. And he says, they all call me Grandpa. Well, this guy looked at that and he says, why? He says, because it's so much more blessed to give than it is to receive. And in Matthew 6:24, it says this, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, or manna, as it says in another place. We all have a decision. Use the earthly wealth that we have to serve, or be like the rich guy in Luke 12 and build your barns. I built barns this summer, by the way, and I asked Janice, as I said, am I doing this? Making barns so that I can store my hay? Well, not quite in the same way as what this guy is saying. But we have to decide, are we going to be faithful in the little and serve God, or are we going to do what we choose? You cannot serve both God and money. And I just want to encourage you, have you think. The decision that you are making today will impact your destiny, your life. You got that? The decisions you make today will impact your further life. That's sobering. And yet Jesus says, use worldly wealth to gain friends. Serve me in a little. Let's pray. Father, thank you.